I used to think the worst day of my life was the day my marriage ended. I was wrong. That day came under the cold, gray sky of Portland, Oregon, as I stood barefoot in our kitchen, the faint smell of burnt toast lingering in the air, while Logan zipped up his suitcase with mechanical indifference. His face, once warm and charming, was now carved from ice. He didn't glance at me, didn't hesitate. With a voice sharp and flat, he said, "I'm taking Zeus. You get the kid." My breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. Zeus, our golden retriever, our companion long before our son Owen was born, the dog who slept at the foot of our bed, chased Owen around the yard, and waited loyally at the door for us every evening. Just like that, Logan claimed him as property and discarded his own son like an unwanted burden. I stood frozen, hands trembling, unable to speak, as Carolyn appeared from the hallway. Carolyn, Logan's mother, always lurking nearby with her judgmental eyes and ever-present fake pearl necklace. She gave a low chuckle and tilted her chin smugly. Well, at least the dog's trained. I felt like the floor had crumbled beneath me. They laughed as if Owen were a broken toy I had been left to fix. Laughed like being a full-time mother mid-divorce was some punishment I had deserved. I clenched my fists by my sides, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I picked up a small, crumpled paper from the counter. One of Owen's drawings. 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. Our family as he knew it. My knees almost gave way at the sight, but I steadied myself. I walked right past Logan and Carolyn without a word. In the next room, I found Owen sitting cross-legged on the carpet, headphones on, coloring in his sketchbook with intense focus, oblivious to the silent hurricane tearing through his home. He was only 9, too young to see how his world was splitting apart around him. I knelt beside him, my heart breaking, watching the pure innocence of my son as he shaded in a bright blue cape on one of his superheroes. In that moment, I made myself a promise. Owen would never think he was the reason this happened. I would shield him from the ugliness, from the twisted narrative his father and grandmother had begun spinning. If Logan wanted the dog, let him take Zeus. If Carolyn wanted to believe she had won something, let her bask in the hollow victory. I had the only thing that mattered. I had Owen, and I would protect him from everything, even if it meant standing alone. But that's not the part one came here to tell you. What changed everything came weeks later, on a cold morning inside a silent courtroom, when my son stood up and asked to read something that made everyone go completely still. Logan Harrington had been magnetic once, confident, witty, the kind of man who could walk into any room and command attention without even trying. When I first met him at 23, working at a small print shop downtown Portland, he strolled in for business cards and walked out with my phone number. I was young, hopeful, and swept up in the intoxicating charm he exuded so effortlessly. Within a year, we were married. For a time, I believed I had found my safe place. But charm, I learned too late, can be a mask. The cracks appeared early, disguised as jokes or just being honest. The first time he forgot to pick me up after a late shift, he shrugged it off with a grin. "I'm busy building a future for us." When I gained weight after Owen's birth, he teased, "Don't let yourself go, Natalie, you're better than that." He called it banter. I called it humiliation. The bad days soon became patterns. Logan controlled the thermostat, the grocery list, the bank accounts, and me. If Owen caught a cold, I was scolded for coddling him. "You're raising a soft boy," Logan snapped once as I tucked Owen back into bed with warm soup and a gentle kiss on his forehead. "Boys don't cry. You're going to ruin him with all this babying." I knew something was breaking, but I couldn't define it then. It was not overt violence, it was erasure, quiet manipulation, the subtle twisting of reality until I questioned every word, every decision, every instinct I had as a mother. And always there was Carolyn, his mother, the ever-watchful sentinel of judgment. She worshipped Logan as if he walked on water. To her, I was just the inconvenient, ungrateful woman who didn't know how good she had it. I can still hear her words echoing like poisoned honey. You should be lucky Logan puts up with your moods. Men like him are rare these days. I stared at her then, numb and exhausted, wondering how many women before me had been silenced by that same cruel sentence. I became a ghost in my own home, quieting my laughter when Logan entered the room, shrinking under his gaze, flinching at his sharp sighs when Owen's innocent chatter grated on his nerves. I stopped wearing bright colors. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped feeling like myself. Owen noticed. Even at such a young age, children see what adults refuse to admit. He saw how I'd pause in mid-sentence when Logan appeared in the doorway. He saw my forced smiles, the hollow sound of my laughter, the way I tiptoed around his father's moods. "Mommy, you're sad," Owen whispered once as he climbed onto my lap. I brushed his curls from his forehead and kissed his temple. I wanted to deny it. I couldn't. When Logan left and took Zeus, it wasn't just the loss of a pet. It was the final act of power, the ultimate statement that he could take what he wanted and leave behind what he deemed disposable. That night, Owen sat beside me quietly on the couch, holding Zeus's empty collar. His small voice broke my heart in half. "I don't think Daddy likes us very much." I pulled him into my arms and rocked him gently under the soft glow of the string lights in our tiny living room. I whispered a silent vow into the crown of his hair. No matter what happened next, I would fight. I would stand up for both of us. The cycle of control, silence, and emotional abuse would end with me. I didn't know then how soon that fight would begin, or how strong my son would prove to be when the moment came. The apartment was small, barely 900 square feet, but it was ours. 2 bedrooms, faded hardwood floors, a kitchen window that overlooked a narrow alleyway of ivy and brick. It didn't matter that the walls were thin or that the heater clanked every time it kicked on. This space belonged to me and Owen, and no one could take that away. I painted Owen's room a soft, calming blue and strung tiny star-shaped lights across the ceiling. At night, he'd lie in bed and watch them flicker, whispering that they made him feel safe. I never told him that I kept my bedroom door open wide just to hear his soft breathing. It was the only sound that calmed my racing thoughts. I worked as a freelance graphic designer, patching together projects to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and whatever little comforts I could afford for Owen. It wasn't much, but it gave me the one thing money couldn't buy: time with my son. Time to rebuild what Logan had tried to break. The first weeks were the hardest. Mornings used to be Owen's favorite. He would bounce out of bed in dinosaur pajamas and pepper me with questions over breakfast. Do whales sleep? Do astronauts take showers in space? How many teeth do sharks have? But now I'd find him already dressed, sitting quietly at the table staring blankly at a cereal box, spoon unmoving. The light had dimmed in him, and I hated that I didn't know how to bring it back. "You okay, buddy?" I asked one morning as I poured his milk. He nodded silently. The silence hurt worse than anything. We fell into a routine. Homemade lunches with hand-drawn notes inside, extra bedtime stories, letting him sleep in my bed most nights because he was afraid of the dark again. He hadn't needed that since kindergarten, but I didn't care. Whatever comfort he needed, I gave it. At night, I'd stare at the ceiling long after he drifted off, the soft glow of the stars in his room seeping faintly down the hallway, wondering how I was going to survive this storm. The walls of our apartment became a sanctuary against the outside world. We started small rituals. Sunday pancakes with extra chocolate chips, movie nights with popcorn and blanket forts, walks through the park where Owen collected shiny pebbles for his treasure box. Slowly he began to draw again. Superheroes, dragons, spaceships, but every drawing included Zeus, always wearing a bright red cape. In every picture, Zeus stood between Owen and some kind of danger, a silent protector, just like he had been. My heart clenched every time I saw those drawings, knowing how much my son missed him, yet marveling at his resilience to imagine safety even where none remained. It wasn't perfect. We had nights of tears, whispered confessions of missing Daddy or the dog, moments where I had to swallow my own emotions to be the strong one. But we were healing one fragile day at a time. I told myself if I could just keep our little world intact, if I could shield him from the manipulation and chaos Logan brought, we might survive. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that Logan was about to come back into our lives. Not to make peace, not to apologize, but to try and reclaim what he thought belonged to him. That was the beginning of the next battle, and I wasn't ready. It started with a knock on the door one rainy Tuesday afternoon. I froze mid-step, heart racing. No one ever came unannounced anymore. Peeking through the peephole, I felt my stomach twist. Logan stood there, perfectly groomed, wearing a charcoal gray blazer and that same confident smile that once made me fall for him. The same smile that now filled me with dread. He waved casually, as if he were just dropping by for coffee. Behind him, barely visible under a large umbrella, was Carolyn, her lips pursed tightly, eyes scanning the doorway with thinly veiled judgment. I didn't answer. I couldn't, but that was only the beginning. The next day, an official envelope arrived in the mail, a custody petition. Logan wanted shared custody. Week on, week off. My hands shook as I read it over and over again. I hadn't heard from him since he left with Zeus. Not a single call, not even a text asking how Owen was. And now he wanted half of Owen's life, like ordering a pizza. Carolyn was quick to join his campaign. I started receiving emails from her, the passive-aggressive tone barely hidden beneath faux concern. Just checking in, is Owen eating enough greens? He looked a little puffy in that last school photo. Thought you should know. I clenched my fists at the keyboard, staring at her words. The audacity, the cruelty masked as care. I forwarded every message to my lawyer, Monica Patel, a calm but sharp family attorney I had found through a friend. Document everything, she advised. Do not respond emotionally. Let them bury themselves. But Logan wasn't finished. He began appearing randomly at Owen's school, standing on the sidewalk with his #OneDad hoodie, smiling and waving at the other parents, handing Owen granola bars with exaggerated care as if the last year hadn't happened. Owen's face said it all. Confusion, discomfort, a forced smile barely holding back the unease. At home, the questions started. Sharp, gut-punching questions I couldn't always answer. Why does Dad say you don't want me to see him? Did you tell him I'm scared at his house? Is it bad to cry when I miss Zeus? I swallowed the lump in my throat each time. No, sweetheart, you're allowed to feel however you feel. The hardest one came late one night as I tucked Owen into bed. He looked up at me with wide, anxious eyes and whispered, Dad told me not to tell you, but he says you cry too much and I'll be messed up if I live with you all the time. I sat on the floor beside his bed, pulled him into my arms and held him tight. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I wouldn't give Logan that power, not again. Instead, I began writing everything down. Every encounter, every backhanded email from Carolyn, every strange text. I saved screenshots, forwarded messages, and kept a meticulous timeline in a black notebook I locked in my desk drawer. Monica's words echoed in my mind. Without evidence, it's just your word against his. And Logan knew how to play the game. Charming, smooth-talking, good with people. The kind of man who called waitresses sweetheart and got away with it. But he had underestimated something. The quiet strength of a mother pushed too far. I didn't know it yet, but the real evidence was coming. Not in emails or text logs, but in the voice of the very person he thought he could manipulate. Owen. The moment came on an ordinary night, the kind where the world feels still, almost deceptively calm. I had just finished washing the dinner dishes when I noticed the light still on in Owen's room. It was past his bedtime. I walked quietly down the hall and found him sitting cross-legged on his bed, his small face pale and tense, the soft blue glow of his tablet illuminating the deep worry in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered as I entered, "I don't think Dad meant for me to see this." My pulse quickened. I sat down next to him and he handed me the device. What I read made my stomach twist into knots I didn't know could exist. It was a string of texts from Logan to someone. I assumed a new girlfriend or one of his friends. The words blurred together in my panic, yet burned into my memory with cruel clarity. Owen is soft. I'll get him fixed once I get more custody. Can't wait to be done with that brat so I can get my real life back. He cries like a baby, just like his mom. Useless. I could barely breathe as I scrolled. My hands shook. My mind screamed. Owen stared at me, tears brimming but unshed. Is it my fault? He asked softly. Does Dad not want me because I'm bad? I wrapped him into my arms so tightly I thought I might never let go. I pressed my lips to his forehead and whispered fiercely, No. No, baby. You are perfect. You did nothing wrong. Your father is the one who's broken. The devastation in his small voice tore me apart. I rocked him gently under the soft hum of the nightlight stars above his bed. That night everything changed inside me. I had spent months surviving, keeping my head above water while enduring Logan's manipulations and Carolyn's barbed emails. I thought if I stayed quiet, focused only on protecting Owen, the storm would pass. But now I understood this was no longer just survival. This was war. Logan had crossed an unforgivable line. He had tried to poison my child's self-worth, and he had failed to realize the one thing he'd never control, the truth. I spent the rest of the night awake, printing every screenshot, labeling each message with dates and times, backing everything up on a flash drive. I stared at the words until they stopped stinging and became cold, hard evidence. The next morning I called Monica. My voice trembled as I read her the worst of the messages. There was a pause on the line. Natalie, this is big, she said quietly. This could change everything. But I waited, heart pounding. But are you sure you want Owen to speak? I froze. The thought hadn't even crossed my mind. The idea of my son having to take the stand, to stare at his father across a courtroom and relive this betrayal, made my stomach turn. He was only 9. I didn't want him tangled in the cold machinery of the legal system, questioned by strangers in suits. But then, I remembered what Owen had said to me after Logan walked out that night with Zeus. You always tell me to speak up when something's not right. Is this one of those times? I knew my answer before she finished the sentence. The next afternoon, I sat Owen down at the kitchen table with a glass of milk and graham crackers. I spoke softly, cautiously. You don't have to, Owen. But if you want to tell the judge what happened, if you want to show him what Dad wrote, I'll be right there the whole time. He looked at me with a seriousness beyond his years. The judge needs to know the truth, right? I blinked back tears and nodded. Yes, baby. He does. I wasn't prepared for what came next, but I had faith in my son. I had faith that the same quiet, kind heart that had endured so much would now become our greatest strength. The countdown to the court date had begun, and we were ready. The next days blurred together like smudged ink on wet paper. Every hour felt heavy, stretched thin by anticipation and dread. Monica moved fast. She filed the evidence into an official court submission, printed and labeled by date, each toxic message a brick in the wall of our defense. We arranged a timeline of Logan's absence, the manipulative texts, Carolyn's poisonous emails. Owen's school counselor was quietly contacted to prepare a statement about the changes she'd observed in him since the separation. The quietness, the anxiety, the sadness that no child should carry. I watched my son through all of this and marveled at his calm. Not fake calm, but the deep, focused kind that comes from knowing what must be done. Every night we talked, not about court, but about how he felt. I answered every question honestly, no matter how hard. Am I bad for not wanting to live with Dad? He asked one night as I tucked him in. I brushed his hair back gently. You're not bad, Owen. You're brave, and you have a right to feel safe. He nodded, but stayed quiet for a long time, then whispered, Why does Dad say mean things about me? My throat tightened. Because some people use words to hurt others when they feel weak inside, I said softly. But their words don't define who you are. You know who you are. He didn't answer, but he reached out and took my hand under the covers, and that small gesture spoke volumes. The night before court, neither of us slept much. Owen lay next to me, wide awake, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. "What if the judge doesn't believe me?" he whispered. I turned to him, pulling him close. "The truth doesn't have to be loud to be real. Just speak from your heart. That's all you need to do." His small hand tightened around mine, and for the first time in weeks, I believed we were going to be okay. The next morning, Owen stood nervously by the window in his freshly ironed school uniform, his favorite bright red sneakers peeking from under pressed navy pants. "They make me brave," he said simply. I smiled, heart aching at both his innocence and his wisdom. I wore a navy dress and simple earrings, barely able to recognize the woman in the mirror who had endured so much but was still standing. Outside the courthouse, Monica waited for us with her sleek leather briefcase and that steady calm that had grounded me so many times in the past weeks. Logan was already there. I saw him from across the steps, pacing like a caged lion in his tailored charcoal suit, flanked by Carolyn and a man I assumed was his lawyer. Carolyn's mouth tightened into a smug line when she saw me, her eyes darting to Owen with a fake, grandmotherly smile. I didn't acknowledge either of them. Instead, I bent down to Owen's level as we walked inside. "You still want to do this?" I asked quietly. He looked up at me with clear, determined eyes. "I'm ready." We entered the courthouse hand in hand. The marble floors echoed under our footsteps. The sterile beige walls and cold metal chairs felt more like a hospital than a place of justice. I had expected loud chaos, but the waiting room was silent, heavy with tension. Monica leaned over and whispered, "We've got this." I smiled faintly, knowing we had something even stronger than legal strategy. We had the truth. I glanced down at Owen as we sat. He swung his feet nervously, not quite reaching the floor, the small notebook where we'd practiced his statement clutched tightly in his lap. I squeezed his shoulder gently. This was the calm before the storm. Soon the judge would enter. Soon the evidence would be heard. Soon my 9-year-old son would stand up in front of strangers and his father and break the cycle of silence forever, and I had never been prouder of him than in that moment. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The air smelled faintly of stale paper and old coffee. Beige walls closed in around rows of stiff wooden chairs. It was the silence I remembered most, that oppressive, waiting silence before a judge enters, when the weight of what's about to happen presses down on everyone. Owen sat next to me at the petitioner's table, legs swinging nervously above the floor, his small fingers gripping the notebook we had practiced with. His red sneakers peeked out from under his neatly pressed pants, a tiny flash of courage in a sea of muted colors. Across the room, Logan sat upright in his tailored suit, rehearsed and perfect. He glanced briefly at Owen, then quickly looked away. Carolyn sat behind him, lips tight, scanning the room as if she were the one about to pass judgment. When the judge finally entered, the room rose to its feet. His robe rustled as he settled at the bench, expression unreadable as he scanned our file. Case number, names, a thick stack of documents representing months of agony. He did not smile. He did not need to. The proceedings began with Logan's lawyer, a polished woman with a calm, confident voice who laid out Logan's case with mechanical precision. "Mr. Harrington seeks equal parenting time to ensure routine and emotional stability for the child. He has demonstrated consistent interest in Owen's well-being." My jaw clenched. Consistent interest? Logan hadn't called Owen on his birthday. He didn't know Owen still needed a nightlight. He hadn't even asked about the allergy medication Owen took since he was a toddler. I breathed slowly, gripping my own trembling hands under the table. Then it was Monica's turn. She stood with quiet, commanding grace and stated firmly, "Your Honor, we are requesting primary physical and legal custody. We have submitted evidence of concerning communication and manipulative behavior by Mr. Harrington, including inappropriate messages sent directly to the minor." The judge raised an eyebrow. "To the child?" Monica nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. With the court's permission, Owen would like to speak." A pause followed, a real heavy pause. The judge leaned forward slightly, peering at Owen over the rim of his glasses. "Are you sure, son?" Owen looked up at me. I gave him the smallest nod. Slowly he stood, smaller than I had ever noticed before in that vast room, yet so impossibly brave. "I want to say something," Owen said, his voice soft but clear. The judge gestured him forward. "Come on up, Owen. Take your time." Owen walked to the stand, shoulders squared, clutching the notebook. His hands shook as he opened it. "My dad sent me some messages," Owen began, voice wavering slightly. "I wasn't supposed to see them, but I did, and I think the judge should know." The bailiff accepted the printed screenshots from Monica and handed them to the judge, who flipped through the pages slowly. Owen read the first message out loud. "Can't wait to be done with that brat, so I can get my real life back." A gasp came from somewhere in the gallery. Carolyn shifted visibly in her seat, face pale. Logan's lawyer stared at Logan, mouth slightly open. Logan just sat stiffly, eyes locked on the table, jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might crack. Owen looked back at the judge. "He was talking about me." The judge nodded solemnly. Owen continued, "He also said I cry like a baby, just like my mom. Useless." Owen's small voice caught, but he stood taller. "My mom doesn't cry all the time. She's strong. She helps me when I'm scared. And I'm not useless." The courtroom went dead silent. The judge folded his hands and studied Owen with something almost gentle in his expression. "Thank you, Owen. That was very brave. Is there anything else you want to tell me?" Owen hesitated, then softly said, "I don't want to live in a place where I feel like I'm a problem. I just want to feel safe." I couldn't breathe. My heart ached with both pride and sorrow. Owen walked back to me and collapsed into my arms. I pulled him close, whispering into his hair, "You did perfect." He nodded into my shoulder, holding on a little tighter than usual. The judge cleared his throat and turned his gaze to Logan. "Mr. Harrington," he said sharply, "do you have any explanation for these messages?" Logan shifted uncomfortably and opened his mouth, but his lawyer interrupted, requesting a brief recess. The judge shook his head firmly. "I've seen enough. The court's responsibility is to act in the child's best interest. Based on the documentation, testimony, and this child's incredible honesty, I am awarding full physical and legal custody to Ms. Harrington." The words hung heavy in the air. Logan said nothing. He stared at the floor, cornered by his own actions. Carolyn stood abruptly, gathering her purse before the hearing was even officially adjourned. The door clicked softly behind her as she vanished. Owen tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Can we get pancakes now?" I laughed for the first time in months, real, full laughter. "Absolutely." We didn't speak about the courtroom on the way home. Owen rolled the window down and let the cold Portland wind whip through his hair as if the events of the morning had been nothing more than a strange, heavy dream. I glanced over at him, watching his face tilt toward the sky, his small fingers drumming softly against the car door. His red sneakers kicked rhythmically in the footwell, a tiny act of defiance against everything we had just endured. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. The courtroom had been merciless, but we had survived. At the diner, we sat in our usual booth under flickering neon lights. Owen ordered pancakes, stacked high with whipped cream and chocolate chips. I got coffee I barely touched, too busy watching him savor every bite. His face softened for the first time in weeks. He giggled when the syrup bottle squeaked. The sparkle in his eyes flickered back to life in small bursts, and I knew we had turned a corner. "I did okay," he asked, mouth full of pancake. I reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. "You did better than okay, baby. You told the truth. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." His grin widened, chocolate smudging the corner of his mouth. In that moment, I realized how impossibly strong my son had been, stronger than I had ever imagined. 2 weeks later, the final custody documents arrived by certified mail. I held the thick envelope in my trembling hands and opened it at the kitchen counter. Full custody granted to me. No shared parenting. No weekend handoffs. No more manipulative texts. Logan had been given supervised visitation only, pending family therapist evaluations and court monitoring, which meant it was very possible he wouldn't see Owen again unless he made drastic, documented changes. He didn't. Logan disappeared almost overnight. No appeals, no angry calls, no more door knocks at our apartment. His lawyer dropped him from her client list. Carolyn never contacted us again. It was as if they had both vanished into thin air, as if the perfect facade they had built for so long had finally crumbled under the weight of their own cruelty. For weeks, I waited for the other shoe to drop, convinced Logan would find some legal loophole to worm his way back into Owen's life. But the silence held. At first it terrified me, then it began to feel like freedom. Owen no longer jumped at every doorbell ring. He stopped checking the front window for unannounced visits. The shadows that had loomed so long over our tiny home began to lift, inch by inch, day by day. For the first time, I could exhale without fear. I could cook dinner, laugh at silly cartoons with Owen, even sit and sip coffee in peace without dread curling in my stomach. We had escaped, not just from Logan and Carolyn, but from the suffocating control, the gaslighting, the endless second-guessing of my own instincts as a mother. Owen was safe and so was I, but neither of us knew that our healing was only just beginning. The transformation wasn't instant. Healing never is. But slowly, steadily, Owen started coming back to life. The drawings were the first sign. At the kitchen table, with colored pencils scattered everywhere, he began sketching again. Not just simple doodles, but full-blown comic book adventures, complete with bold lines and vivid colors. I stared in wonder the first time he slid one across the table toward me. A superhero mom, cape billowing behind her, saving a frightened child from a towering monster labeled fear. The hero carried a shield labeled truth and wielded a sword called courage. I couldn't speak. My hands shook as I traced the lines with my fingertips. "You made me a superhero," I whispered. Owen nodded matter-of-factly. "You saved me." I hung that drawing on the refrigerator, right at eye level, where I could see it every single day. In the weeks that followed, the nightmares stopped. There were no more late-night footsteps padding down the hall. No more tiny figure climbing into my bed at 2 a.m. seeking comfort from the monsters of his dreams. Owen slept through the night, wrapped safely in blankets under his ceiling of glowing stars. His questions changed too. Gone were the heartbreaking uncertainties about his father, replaced by the endless, curious questions of a child finally allowed to be a child. Do sharks have belly buttons? How big is space? Were dinosaurs ticklish? I answered every single one with a smile, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt in years. My own life slowly stitched itself back together too. I took on new freelance clients and was finally able to work consistent hours. I opened a small savings account, something that had felt impossible during the months when every spare dollar went toward legal fees and therapy sessions. I even signed Owen up for soccer, something I had once thought we could never afford. His joy at wearing his first pair of cleats and running freely on a field was priceless. I treated myself to something too, a simple membership at a local book club. Nothing extravagant, just a circle of women, most of them single mothers or divorce survivors, sitting in a cozy corner of a local bookstore once a month to talk about life and loss and strength and healing. I had found a tribe I didn't know I needed. Women who nodded quietly when I told my story, who shared their own war wounds, and who understood the strange, exhausting beauty of surviving something you never thought you could. We weren't bitter. We were strong, strong in a way we never asked to be, but proud nonetheless. Some days I would catch myself watching Owen from across the room, sprawled on the living room rug, markers in hand, humming softly as he worked on his next creation. My chest would tighten with overwhelming gratitude. We had been through a fire, but we had come out the other side, not just intact, but transformed. The sparkle was back in his eyes. The color had returned to my cheeks. We were finally free, and I knew we were going to be okay. People sometimes ask me if I hate him, if I hate Logan for what he did, for what he tried to take from us. The truth is I don't. I don't have room for hate anymore. I let that weight go the day Owen stood in that courtroom and spoke his truth. What I feel even now is sadness. Sadness for the father Owen never had and never will. Sadness for the man who could have been someone's safe place, who could have chosen love and presence and patience, but instead chose control. I even feel sadness for the boy inside Logan, who probably never learned how to love without using it as leverage. But I no longer carry his legacy. I stopped the day we walked out of that courthouse hand in hand. I do still talk about that day, not because it was dramatic or because we won, but because of what it meant. It meant Owen's voice mattered. It meant a child could be heard and believed. It meant a judge, an entire system, could look past adult facades and see the simple honesty of a child asking to feel safe. That day, the cycle stopped with us. If I could tell any mother, any child, anyone listening to this story just one thing, it would be this: you are not powerless. Not when you have the truth. Not when you have love. And definitely not when you have courage. Logan took the dog. He thought he walked away with the prize. Something loyal, obedient, uncomplicated. He left me the kid, and I got the better deal. My son is not bitter. He is kind. He is honest. He is growing up knowing that love doesn't come with conditions, that being soft is not a weakness, and that being kind is never something to apologize for. That courtroom didn't just change a custody agreement. It gave Owen back his voice, and it gave me back my life. We built something new out of the wreckage, stronger, safer, real. We still go to that diner sometimes, the same booth by the window. Owen orders his pancakes with extra chocolate chips and whipped cream, and I drink my coffee with both hands, savoring the peace that once felt like an impossible dream. I watch him laugh at the syrup bottle squeaking, and I know we're not just surviving anymore. We're living.